Goes Green Insights Forum. So we launched our new stakeholder engagement process at the back end of last year. That has split up our stakeholder engagement into this Insights Forum, which is all about a download of information of what we're up to on the programme. And then we also have our other stakeholder engagement forum, which is the Gas Goes Green review group. I see some of the review group members are on this today. That's a closed forum of our key stakeholders who are helping to shape what we're doing on the programme. That met for the first time a couple of months ago. And the idea going forward is that both of these different stakeholder engagement activities will continue on a roughly 6-monthly cadence. If we can just flick to the next slide quickly. So agenda for today, a welcome from me, and then I'm going to go through what to expect from the Gas Goes Green programme in the rest of 2023. In some senses, it's a programme launch for the year, but we're mindful that we are already scarily 4 months into the year. And actually, some of what I'm going to talk to you about today and some of what others are going to cover with you as well are activities that are already underway or already completed actually this year. So it's not really a launch, it's more really an update on what we're up to for the rest of the year. And then we plan to use the next Insights Forum, which will be probably October, but certainly later in the year, to outline our plans for the whole of 2024. If we could just, I'll just cover the rest of this, the agenda. Sorry, so I'll cover that, and then a Q&A on our programme for the rest of 2023 with myself, and I've got Vicky Mustard from ExoServe, who's been involved in the work that we're doing on hydrogen blending to help me with that Q&A as well. I'll then go into more detail on the report that we published last week called A Hydrogen Vision for the UK. I've got David Watson from Cadent, who did a lot of the groundwork on that project, doing a bit of a deep dive into the report. And then I've also got Mark Alexander from Mutual Energy, who will be giving a Northern Irish perspective on the report and what it said about the growth of hydrogen in Northern Ireland. And then we'll have a chance for some Q&A on that at the end before I wrap up. If we could just quickly go to the next slide before I go into the programme for the year. So just so everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared on ENA's YouTube channel. This is normal process for these Insights Forums and the stakeholder engagement that went before. But just to note that by staying on the call, you are consenting to being recorded and to being shared on our YouTube channel. There's some instructions there just in case you have any issues with audio or visual or anything while you're on the call. I've said already, but please do mute your microphone so we can avoid any disruption or anything to the presentations. And also for the Q&A sessions, the way we're planning to run this is exactly how we've run it in the past. For those who've been at our Insights Forums in the past, we're going to use Slido. For those who haven't used this before, you just simply go to slido.com in your browser and then type in the code GGGIF, so Gas Goes Green Insights Forum, into Slido, and that should give you access to a Q&A function to ask questions. That QR code there as well can be used. If you just scan that, that will lead you to Slido and lead you to input the code and do that. So we'll be running the Q&A through that. I've got a project manager, Katie, for the Gas Goes Green programme, who will be chairing and facilitating the Q&A sessions and using Slido for that. So hopefully that's all clear. If we flick onto the next slide, I will take you through what to expect from the Gas Goes Green programme for the rest of 2023. So as I said, in some senses, it's a programme launch, but mostly really an update. Before I go into the detail, I wanted to just say that what we're trying to focus the programme on at the moment is responding to what we're seeing in quite a rapidly developing policy landscape and building the necessary evidence to support key decisions that need to be made around policy. So we started the Gas Goes Green programme back in 2020 with our Pathways to 2050 report, which outlined possible pathways for the future of the gas network. Much of our work back then was future focused thinking, and really it was trying to get a lot of momentum behind this and get this off the ground in the industry. But a lot has changed in the last 3 years. So we've had a hydrogen strategy in 2021, which included a production target at the time, which was 5 gigawatts of hydrogen production by 2030. We then had the British Energy Security Strategy in the start of 2022, which increased this target up to 10 gigawatts and provided specific targets within that for green and blue hydrogen. Off the back of all of this as well, we've had policy framework starting to be developed quite rapidly to support the growth of low carbon hydrogen production. So that's particularly the development of business models by government to financially support production, but also the development of things like standards, certification schemes as well, to support that as well. We've more recently seen the start of a process to develop a similar policy framework around hydrogen transport and storage to help connect up that production with end users as well. That's a little bit behind where we are on production, but there's a lot that's gone into that recently. Government consulted on that towards the back end of last year and are making progress on developing that policy framework this year. We've had a commitment to government as well to make a policy decision on hydrogen blending in 2023. So that's sort of rapidly coming around the corner, and we're expecting that at the back end of this year. We've had the new green gas support scheme as well to support biomethane injection. That's been put in place, and we're starting to see sites make use of that scheme as well. A number of other things that have happened in the last 3 years, actually a huge amount of progress that's been made in all things green gas. And that's why really I'm trying to pivot the programme away from being a solely sort of future focused navel gazing exercise into actually focusing on the policy decision points that we have now, the 2023 blending decision, the 2026 decision point that we have on hydrogen's role in heat, and really focus the programme on being useful for those policy and regulatory decisions that will have to be made along the way. So to do that, we're splitting up our work for the rest of 2023 into 3 key areas. The first of which is on hydrogen blending. So as I said, there's a decision point in 2023 on this from government. So we've been doing a lot of work already in this space. We published Britain's hydrogen blending delivery plan in January of last year, and this really set out the case for change in implementing hydrogen blending, the proposed forward timeline for development of blending activities, and some different approaches to implementation as well. And then last autumn, we published another report called Enabling Hydrogen Blending from Industrial Clusters, which really outlined how an approach to building out hydrogen blending starting in industrial clusters at those key anchor hydrogen production facilities could work. That included capacity maps alongside it as well, which showed where and how much network capacity could be made available for blending. And the key finding from that really was that it is a lot, around 35 terawatt hours per year of blending capacity just in the gas distribution networks, and a total of around 60 terawatt hours if you add in the national transmission system as well. And that's serious amounts of homes, millions and millions of homes. That's serious amounts of CO2 as well. So really what this report was trying to show is just the scale of the possibilities that could be there with blending. We've also been feeding into the development of government's value for money case around blending as well, which they're developing at pace at the moment. And we are still expecting a policy decision on this to be made in 2023. There is also the HSC safety case that has to be made here to be absolutely certain before we put blended hydrogen into the pipes that we can be certain of the safety case for this. Huge amount of work's been done in the industry, particularly through the HyDeploy project on this. The HSC will have to give the green light to that before we have implementation as well. Our expectation is that we will get a policy decision in 2023, which will be subject to the final review of the HSC safety case. So what are we doing right now, given that we've done so much in this space already? What we're doing now is ensuring that from a technical and regulatory perspective, we're absolutely ready to implement blending as soon as we get the green light to do so. So we feel as the networks that we've made the case for it, we've fed into government the necessary sort of evidence, things to make that case. both from an economic viewpoint and also from a safety point of view. What we need to do is make sure that we're absolutely ready to go. So we're doing this through 3 projects that we have under the blending workstream. The first of which looks at the functional specification for hydrogen injection to grid blending facilities. So this is a really key piece of work that will inform the basis of designing the real future blending projects that intend to connect to the grid. What it's doing is informing the key components and controls required at injection sites to enable blending while ensuring regulatory compliance as well. So that's the first part of the blending projects. Second is looking at market frameworks, so particularly around regulatory change, code changes, license changes that will be needed to implement blending. So over summer, we've got a group looking at blending who will be working with key stakeholders to assess the changes required across all of these different pieces of the puzzle. We'll be focusing on 5 different pillars, so any primary legislation change that might be required, regulatory change, license changes, code changes, obviously specifically looking at the Uniform Network Code, and agreements as well. And then lastly as well, we'll be looking at capacity and connections options for hydrogen blending. So exploring how networks could allocate blending capacity and manage interactions between injection facilities. So on all of these different things, we'll be engaging with stakeholders over the summer, and we're looking to do that engagement now so that we've got deliverables and outputs to put out towards the end of the year to support the blending decision. I'm sure there'll be some questions on blending. I've got, as I noted earlier, I've got Vicky Mustard from Exoserve, who's been very, very involved in those projects so far, to join me for the Q&A on any of those points. So that's the first sort of 3 sort of pillars of what we're doing on the programme this year. The second is looking at really the future of the gas networks. And we're looking at this from 3 different angles, obviously a hugely broad topic, but we're looking at this from 3 different angles. The first of this was culminated in the report that we put out last week called A Hydrogen Vision for the UK. I won't say too much about this now because I've got David Watson joining from Cadent to go through this in a little bit more detail, and Mark Alexander from Mutual Energy as well. But just very briefly, what this document has done is lay out a vision for what hydrogen could contribute to the economy, what it could give to consumers, and ultimately how we would join up production and demand through the growth of pipeline networks over the next 20 to 30 years. It's important to note it's not a rollout plan, and this will be mentioned several times by others on the call. It's a vision, so it's a really kind of optimist view of the future, and it's really trying to set out how we can make the most of the hydrogen opportunity in the UK. So that's one angle we're looking at the future of gas networks. Another angle we're looking at is actually somewhat the opposite in some senses, which is what are the impacts of reducing gas demand? Now, we know that there will definitely be reducing natural gas demand out to 2050. There will more than likely be reducing gas demand in any sense, and our Hydrogen Vision report acknowledged that as well, that even with high amounts of hydrogen in the energy system, we're more than likely going to have less gas in the energy system in 2050 than we do right now. And so we need to plan for this, and we need to look at what the impacts of reducing that gas demand will be. And there are many, many different issues that this brings about, including, but not limited to, big regulatory questions around how the regulatory framework deals with declining asset bases in certain areas, or at least certainly declining natural gas asset bases as some of those switch over to hydrogen. There are big who pays questions. So as fewer consumers use natural gas, or maybe particular regions use a lot less natural gas and switch over to heat pumps and other technologies, we need to work out how this natural gas network that's left over is paid for by a declining consumer base. And there are also quite big practical questions. So how can individual pipelines practically be decommissioned? What's the process around that? What are the safety questions associated with that? How can we ensure consistency and security of supply for consumers as well? There are just a few of the ways of looking at this, but there are plenty of other ways of looking at this as well. We know that our key stakeholders are looking at this in quite a lot of detail. We've been speaking to them through our review group. thinking about what this all means for consumers and for net zero as well. Government are looking at it quite closely. The National Infrastructure Commission and Ofgem are looking at it quite closely. Citizens Advice have announced that they're looking at it as part of their work programme for this year as well. So we don't actually really have a very, very clear view on exactly what we are doing in this space, but what we want to make sure that we do through the Gas Goes Green programme is coordinate with our key stakeholders to make sure we're not duplicating efforts and we're genuinely adding extra knowledge to the debate on this and advancing things forward. So we want to do that, and we want to really make sure that what we're producing is valuable to our stakeholders. So we're really in listening mode on this, and we welcome through the Q&A and through any other engagement with us any thoughts from our stakeholders on what you'd like to see in this area. And the last piece under this pillar is looking at biomethane. So the role of biomethane and hydrogen in a decarbonised grid. Our Hydrogen Vision report was focused on exactly that. It was focused on hydrogen, and we acknowledged in that report that that report wasn't covering biomethane, but biomethane has a really important role to play in a decarbonised gas grid. It's playing a really important role right now in providing a really important decarbonisation tool to get the decarbonisation of the gas networks underway while we scale up hydrogen production. But we're mindful that we need to start really articulating what the role of biomethane and hydrogen are collectively in a decarbonised gas grid as we go out to 2050. It's probably right to say at this point that we as gas networks don't believe we would ever get to a point where the amount of gas we will need in 2050 in the system is going to be serviceable by solely biomethane. And therefore, we don't really believe that a solely biomethane-based GB-wide network is going to be economically viable in the long term. But we do think that biomethane has a hugely important role to play, both as a transition fuel, but also in the long term to have an enduring role in the system. So this piece of work is to try and evaluate what that role actually is, how the two gases can work alongside each other, and looking at the best long-term use of biomethane in the system. We're going to be looking at different options to manage that interaction, either at production sites or in the network as well. Lots of different options here. So this could include converting biomethane to hydrogen to put in the network. It could include at least looking at the possibility of an 100% biomethane network or 100% biomethane networks in particular areas. It's going to look at the potential for blending biomethane into hydrogen. That's something that we don't think is really going to be a starter, but it's something that we need looking at anyway. And also potentially using or transporting biomethane through non-pipeline methods as well. So we want to try and look at all of the different options to make the most of biomethane in the long term. But what I do want to make clear to everyone on the call today is that we as gas networks do see that biomethane has huge value in delivering net zero. There's a lot of scaling up that can still be done on biomethane, and it's got a really important role to play, not least in producing negative emissions potentially in the future as we can scale up carbon capture facilities as well. We want to absolutely make the most of this. So this project is about taking the first steps to try and articulate what we think that future role will be. So fairly early stages of scoping still, but we expect to go out to the market for some support with that project in the next few weeks or months to help us to develop that project. It won't be a quick turnaround. We'll be doing that project for much, if not all, of the rest of the year, but it's a really important part of what we're doing on the programme. And then last but not least, our comms and stakeholder engagement, which is exactly what all of you are here for today. We want to make sure that on the programme we continue to speak to our stakeholders as much as we possibly can, and we're mindful that a lot of the value actually of the programme is simply giving updates to the wider industry and making sure that you're aware of the direction of travel of the networks. So a few pieces to pull out here. We're working with friends at Hydrogen UK on a piece of work that's comparing the commitments made internationally on hydrogen. So I'm sure most, if not all, on the call will know about the impact that the subsidies in the US through the Inflation Reduction Act has had, and also the package of subsidy reform in the EU, the Repower EU package, has had on the overall landscape for hydrogen and renewables as well. We made a really good start in this country on all things hydrogen a few years ago, but we want to really look at the overall international context here and say, where have we got to? Are we keeping pace internationally? And if not, what needs to be done in that space? So that's a piece of work, as I said, that we're looking to produce with Hydrogen UK. We'll also be publishing our green gas scorecard. This is something we've been doing for a couple of years. That highlights the progress that we are making so far on greening the gas grid. Is really focused on biomethane and biomethane production sites coming online and biomethane injection facilities as well. And we'll publish our usual update to that later this year. And then, of course, we'll continue to do our review groups and insights forums. Next review group likely to be in a few months' time, and the next insight forum likely October or at least later in the year. So that should hopefully give you a good overview of what we've got planned for the rest of the year. We've got some time on the agenda now for Q&A. As I noted earlier, we're going to use Slido for this. I don't know if people have already put questions in the Slido. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Katie Harrison, who's a project manager on our Gas Goes Green programme. She's just going to chair the Q&A session for me, with myself and Vicky Mustard from Exoserve answering questions. So Katie, over to you.
Thanks very much, James, and thanks all for joining this morning. So I think it would be really useful if we could start by Vicky, if you could just explain your role at Exoserve and how Exoserve have been involved in the blending work that we're doing today.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Vicky Mustard. I'm the decarbonisation lead for Exoserve. For those of you who don't know Exoserve, we're the central data services provider for the gas industry. And my role is very much working alongside all of the networks, having a look at what we need to do to support hydrogen. So from a blending point of view, we facilitated the future billing methodology consultation. And I've been working closely with all of the networks, looking at regs and all the legal requirements, as well as what system implications there may be to ensure billing works for blending.
Brilliant, thanks, Vicky. And staying with you, we've had a question looking at wanting to know further information on how networks will be engaging with producers when we do these blending projects. So do you want to say a bit more about how we'll be doing that stakeholder engagement piece?
Sure. So I think there's two things really. So there will be we start again. There's going to be a big engagement program with going out to talk to people about what's happening in blending, what do you want? But I would also throw the question back sort of as to how would hydrogen producers like to be engaged? Because at the moment we don't really have a process for this. So it's something that we're going to build. So I don't know who it is. I think it's an anonymous question, but if you've got any views as to how you would like to be engaged, we'd like that to be shared as well.
Definitely. And if anyone does have any views, we've got our Gas Goes Green email address at the end, and happy to share mine and Vicky's email addresses if you want to sort of chat to us offline.
Yes.
Brilliant. And then another blending question that we've had quite a few upvotes on, Vicky. Questions have been previously raised about the practicalities of blending for I&C customers if the blend fluctuates. Has this been resolved? I don't know if you want to tackle that one.
I get all the good questions.
It's a really common question, isn't it? So.
It is. So has it been resolved? I would say that very much depends on the I&C consumer, which is always the problem when we're talking about consumers here, because each individual I&C consumer may have a different requirement. From the work that's been going on within HyDeploy, there's been a lot of work looking at what blend does, how blend will be impacting. And I'm not the engineer in the room by any stretch of the imagination, but realistically, it depends. Horrible answer to a question is it depends, but it will very much depend on what the blend mix is, what the I&C consumer can take, and how they are managing the gas themselves that's going in. So there has been lots of trials and tests across HyDeploy, and we haven't seen any issues to this point, but obviously we haven't tested with every single I&C consumer out there. So we are comfortable that we are going to be able to blend and it won't have a major impact on I&C consumers, but that will very much depend on the consumer. Not a great answer, but an answer.
It's the answer that we always give, though, isn't it? It's a very common question. And then also we've quite a few on blending for you, Vicky. What demo projects are going to be carried out to test blending and deblending requirements? So I think it's safe to say we've already done quite a bit of testing on this with the high deploy and future grid. I don't know if you want to just expand a bit there on what's already been done.
Sure. So there's been a lot of testing, particularly within high deploy, having a look at whether you would need to deblend, where the deblend would sit. And so far, I say so far because obviously testing is still ongoing, but so far the view has been so we've been testing with Pilkington Glass, we've done testing with ceramics manufacturer, there's also been testing with a number of bakeries, having a look at the impact on the bread, does it change any flavours, as well as the equipment that's held at those particular premises. And so far, again, we've not come across any problems that would lead to somebody needing to deblend. Now, that may be different at a transmission level. And the testing is very much ongoing with the Future Grid site in Spade Adam to have a look at what the possible impacts might be. I think it very much depends on how much you are consuming as to whether you're going to need to blend and deblend. So far, we haven't seen that need for deblending, but we haven't sort of finalised the testing at a transmission level yet. So I would say watch this space at the moment, but we're fairly comfortable with what we've tested at a distribution level that deblending isn't going to be required.
Brilliant. And then coming to you again, Vicky, there's a couple of questions here that I think we can probably merge. So there's one asking how the FBM findings fed into blending, and there's also a question from David Simmons who said the reports in the papers that blending hydrogen into our gas grid will incur costs to consumers. Who is looking at the impacts of this? I don't know if you can tell the story of what FBM found and how that we fed that into the work, and will there be an impact on consumer bills?
Sure. So FBM was a great project to be involved with because we kind of really got into the nitty gritty of what is the impact. If you're a geek like me, it was great. What is the impact going to be on the central systems, on billing? How's it going to work across the entire supply chain? What's the difference going to be from an end consumer point of view? And what came out of FBM is very much, we want this to be as minimal change as possible. So we want to ensure that if we are putting a blend into the network, it has as minimal a change and a minimal cost to consumer where we can. So the intention is from a process point of view that the flow weighted average process, the way we manage calorific value won't change. So although the calorific value of hydrogen and the calorific value of methane is so very different, depending on what level of blend we will put into the system, will depend on whether it has an impact on the end bill or not. So I can't talk to you about the cost of hydrogen because that's not something that we've looked at. But we're not expecting there to be any additional costs to systems if we blend at a particular level that ensures that the flow weighted average will stay the same. Did you want to jump in there, James?
Yeah, I was just, all absolutely right, Vicky. The point I wanted to jump in on was maybe the sort of non-system cost, which is the thing that's sort of got the attention in the newspapers, really. Just to be clear that it's not really blending that's going to lead to an additional cost. It is hydrogen production, of which blending is part of. The current plan is that to support hydrogen production financially, the government is going to put in place a hydrogen levy to gather the funds for that. So it will have an impact on consumer bills. That's the current plan. The idea being that supports hydrogen production to get up to scale, get those costs down, and in the long term, consumers will be better off. Blending is currently envisaged by government as a reserve off-taker, which means that if you want to have a hydrogen production project and get financial support from government to do so, you need to have a contract with an industrial as an off-taker. But if they give the green light to blending, if there are any issues with that industrial, any sort of downtime or any issues with sort of overproduction or anything, you would be able to put some excess production into the grid as blended volumes. So if you look at that from a cost point of view, it's not really blending that's leading to any sort of cost there. It's supporting hydrogen production. The reports that have been seen in the papers are taking a very simplistic view of saying if we had 20% of hydrogen in our network as blended hydrogen and it was at a certain cost, what would the impact on bills be? That's not a position we're going to be in, certainly 20% blend for quite a long time, if ever really. what blending is all about. It's about getting the sector going. It's about being able to de-risk those early production projects by giving them another offtake if they have any issues with industrials and things in the early stages. That brings cost of capital down on projects and allows projects to come on at a much bigger scale. So I think my response on that point on what's been raised in the papers, I mean, I've gone through that, but the biggest thing is that if you can get these projects in at scale, bring cost of capital down, bring costs down, then long term we are all going to be better off.
I think the only other thing I'd add is there's a kind of a hidden benefit to blending, which we saw come out of the back of HyDeploy when we tested it in the homes, in that it starts the conversation around hydrogen across consumers, and consumers start to see how it is, what it affects, what it does in the home, and that's really led, I would say, to a very different view of various 100% hydrogen projects, depending on where they are in the country, because people are used to hydrogen and are talking about hydrogen because of that particular trial in Winlayton. So that's the kind of hidden benefit, I think, to hydrogen blend, as well as it starts the consumer conversation, gets people understanding what hydrogen actually is. Did that answer all of the question, Katie? Sorry.
I think it did, Vicky, and I'm just conscious of time. So James, I'll ask you a non-blending question, because we've had a couple of non-blending ones. There's a couple of comments about safety, and in particular concerns over NOx emissions from hydrogen combustion and things. I'm conscious that we've not put anything out as under Gas Goes Green on safety since our 2021 sort of hydrogen safety commitment. Do you want to just say a few words on safety and what we know on NOx emissions?
Yeah, absolutely, I would. Before I do, I'm getting a weird bit of feedback on the line, so I hope, can you hear me okay? Am I loud and clear? Okay, good stuff. Must just be my computer then. Safety. So the networks are obviously very, very serious about safety, and will work to ensure hydrogen can be used at least as safely as natural gas in the early trials, so in the neighbourhood trial and hydrogen villages, and then as we look out to the town pilot as well. And there's a huge amount of work going on this, liaising with the health and safety executive. So I don't want to go into too much detail on safety, other than to say that the work, there's a huge amount of work being done on it. The HSC will not give the green light to any hydrogen projects if they're not confident that the evidence shows that they are safe. And what we're shooting for is to have hydrogen at least as safe as natural gas. Did you say there was a question on NOx as well?
Yeah, there was what has been done about concerns over NOx emissions from hydrogen combustion. It's quite specific on that safety element.
Yeah, so I think it's the same story really, in the sense that there are NOx emissions already associated with burning natural gas, and there are maximum requirements over that currently already, which are set by HSE. What we're seeing so far from hydrogen boilers that are being produced is that actually the amounts of NOx being produced are much lower than that current maximum requirement, and even lower than natural gas boilers which are there today. And as I said, with safety, the aim is to have safety at least as safe as natural gas, if not safer. Same with NOx, in the sense that we want NOx levels to be as low as they can possibly be, at least as low as natural gas, if not lower. So it's the same story really on that side. We haven't seen anything in the safety evidence so far that points to there being an issue the other way around, of being more NOx than natural gas boilers. I probably should mention on that point as well also carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is an issue with natural gas boilers, and that's why we're all told to put carbon monoxide alarms into our homes. And carbon monoxide simply isn't an issue at all when burning hydrogen.
Brilliant, thanks, James. And then I'm just conscious of we've not answered one of the most voted questions, and I can see we've got David on the line. So if we just do this one finally, do we have a rough timeline of when we can expect the HSE safety case for blending to be greenlit? I don't know if Vicky, do you want to take that, or James?
I can
start.
Vicky may know a little bit more than me, but what I know of this is that government is still looking to make a policy decision on blending in 2023, as I've said. They're currently saying publicly that they may well decouple that decision from the safety decision and make a decision subject to a later HSC decision, and that's simply because HSC have got a lot of evidence that's been produced to really sift through and review in order to greenlight it. I think we're really expecting that decision point will likely come next year, and we're all working towards a sort of 2025 point to actually really get blending up and running and moving. It's a bit of a moving feast at the moment, but that's roughly what we're expecting.
Brilliant. Was there anything you'd wanted to add, Vicky?
Just that at the moment it's as long as a piece of string, isn't it? It's that there's no real view. I know HSE has some resource issues, and they have a lot to do at the moment around more than just hydrogen. So it's just getting that priority. And like you say, they've got quite a lot of evidence to sift through. So I think it's a watch this space at the moment. There's definitely a push on them to get it done as quickly as they can, but it's got to be done right. So we'll see as it comes through.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious we've not been able to answer everyone's questions, but we do have another Q&A session a bit later on in the workshop. So if we carry on with the agenda, James, and I'll pass back to you.
The only thing I was going to
Lovely.
say, Katie, I can go through and put some answers in if you want.
Oh, perfect, thanks, Vicky.
No.
Thank you, Vicky, and thanks, Katie. So the next agenda item is to go through our report, which we published last week on a hydrogen vision for the UK. I've got David Watson here from Cadent, who was the deliverable lead on the network side for developing this report. So I'll hand to him in just a minute's time. I've also got Mark Alexander from Mutual Energy here. This was a great collaboration we did on this report with the GB networks, but also with the networks in Northern Ireland, and Mark will talk you through that. Before I hand to David, I just wanted to sort of set the scene for this. This is a report which shows a plausible vision for the rollout of hydrogen infrastructure, with a particular focus on pipeline infrastructure out to 2050. It is not intended in any way as a rollout plan. So this is not the networks trying to say this is what will happen. It's the networks trying to say this is what could happen and this is the opportunities associated with that. So if we were to have this much hydrogen in the system, this is how the networks would roll out pipelines to accommodate that. There's the benefits that would come from this to the consumers, to the economy, and elsewhere as well. So I think I'll probably pause now and hand over to David, but I just wanted to make that point really to set the scene. So David, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, James. I also thank you for saying I was the deliverable lead. I have to say it did feel like I was able to delegate quite a lot of that delivery to you and Katie. So thank you to both of you. But also, I guess also thank you to, I don't know, I can't quite see who's on the call, but the development of this report involved a lot of people, right, including people that really got quite deep into the modelling right across a number of the gas distribution networks, National Gas, and obviously Mutual Energy, and we'll hear from Mark as well. It really was a collaboration right across the gas industry. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to 10 minutes max, I promise, where I'll just touch on what the report is and why we thought it was a good thing to do, and then give you a few of the headlines from the report about how we built it, what you might find in it if you've not seen it, and then I don't know if it's been distributed to this group, but it's on the ENA website. And I do encourage you to have a look at it. It's the sort of thing where it's quite easy to flick through with a cup of coffee and you'll get the real gist of it, which is kind of the aim. It's quite visual. But going back right to its conception, I think there was an idea that we've been quite good at saying the potential role that hydrogen could have, and obviously people understand the nature of the gas infrastructure today. But we've not really done is articulate with any without any real sort of visualization or done it engagingly how that journey might happen. And that's quite important, because I think whilst we're in this situation where there's, I'd say, near universal acceptance that hydrogen's got a crucial role to play in delivering net zero, there's still quite a wide spectrum of potential outcomes between now and 2050, all the way up from at the very minimum, we're using it to decarbonize industry, some transport, and it's got a role to play in the electricity sector, all the way up to where we think it could play, where it's also got a role in decarbonizing heat in buildings and homes, for example. And what we wanted to do was show, if we took that potential role, and it is a potential, it's not a roadmap at all, but that potential role, what would the infrastructure infrastructure look like? What would we need to build and repurpose in order to make that happen? And how would that change over time? And we wanted to do that in a real visual way with maps, icons, lines on charts that people could quite easily engage with. And so that's what the report does, right? So it's the first time that we've all come together alongside Mutual Energy from Northern Ireland to show the opportunity of what developing that hydrogen economy might look like between 2030 and 2050 in a series of maps, setting out, I always call it a plausible possible vision of the future of how it could happen. It's not a blueprint. The maps are written in crayon, I quite like to say. And when you have a look at the report, you'll see that we have maps there. They go in 5-year increments from 2030, 2035, etc., all up to 2050 to show what we think that infrastructure build out could look like, when new and repurposed pipes could appear and where they could appear, and also the other non-pipe infrastructure as well, hydrogen production, hydrogen storage, and also some hydrogen demand from major users such as, for example, airports. Transport hubs are in there as well. Now, it's not just us just drawing lines on a pie on a map. I mean, it is us drawing lines on a map, but it is rooted in some proper methodology. Some of you might be aware that there was some work done a couple of years ago between ENA members and BEIS called the system. I'm going to get this wrong. Systems transformation, or a common future end states, I think it was also known as. And essentially, it's just a series of scenarios, potential futures for the gas industry, all the way from we electrify pretty much everything, all the way through to hydrogen is the big lever that we're pulling in order to get to net zero, and about 11 different scenarios in the middle. And so what we did, in order for this to have some sort of robust standing, this vision report to have a robust standing, we've taken that modelling and we've taken one of those scenarios. It is a scenario, I'll be open and honest, it is a scenario that allows us to showcase the breadth of the infrastructure we might need, and therefore hydrogen does play a reasonably material role in that. It's not the highest hydrogen scenario, it's a very plausible scenario, I would say, but we take that scenario, we've updated it for developments that we've seen since that modelling was done, for example around the industrial clusters like HyNet on the east coast, up in Scotland for example, and we've then used that to plot on the maps as to where the pipes are going to be. Now when you see the maps, you'll see it's transmission pipes. When it's quite hard to show the distribution pipeline network on an A4 piece of paper, but you'll see that as the hydrogen network expands, implicitly the distribution network around those transmission assets is also being repurposed as well. And a few metrics to throw at you there. These maps are based on a scenario where you've got around 350 terawatt hours of hydrogen, so it's bullish for hydrogen, but it's by no means the most bullish scenario you'll see out there. It's roughly aligned with the CCC's headwinds scenario, which means that you've got roughly about 17 million of the UK's homes supplied by hydrogen, and about sort of 14-15 million on heat networks. So a slight sway towards hydrogen, but very much a balanced scenario. It also includes 50 terawatt hours of storage in there as well. It's got some transport that's been decarbonised, for example, some rural train lines. There are some hubs for heavy freight, for example, as well as heat, obviously, for homes and businesses. Now, the whole purpose of this, oh, you can see, I could just set it on the screen. You can see the 2030 and the 2050 map there, and you can also see that the color coding, we sort of moved from grey to purple. When you look at that, that's also we've sort of by LDZ, like a heat map of how much the percentage of properties or connections, I should say, percentage of connections that have converted to hydrogen. The deeper the purple, the more people have converted from methane to hydrogen as opposed to disconnecting and electrifying. So it gives you an idea of how that might play out differently across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And the idea is that this report, it's for everybody, right? So it's on the ENA website, but we're also thinking that it can be used for stakeholders, whether they be in Westminster, across industry, regional authorities, local authorities, for them to be able to get an idea, and it is just an idea, like it's not a blueprint, an idea of when hydrogen could come to their area, and what that might look like. It enables us to start a conversation about what the transition to net zero looks like, the role that hydrogen could play, and what that means to people in specific areas. So I'll pause there. I know that we're also going to hear from Mark on the mutual energy angle on this one as well, and that's an important one to hear. And then I guess I'll be here for questions when we get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. I'll hand straight over to Mark, please, to talk through the Northern Irish angle.
Thanks, James. Just to introduce myself, my name is Mark Alexander. I'm the Energy Transition Manager for Mutual Energy. It's great to have the chance to present at the forum this morning. And I'm going to try and give you a sense for the hydrogen opportunity in Northern Ireland, as well as some of the work that Mutual Energy is doing in relation to hydrogen readiness. Appreciate not everyone on the call is going to be familiar with the gas arrangements in Northern Ireland. So just got a couple of slides that provide background information, both on just who Mutual Energy are, as well as the main characteristics of the gas market. So Mutual Energy, as the name suggests, is a wholly mutualized business. We were set up to own and operate energy infrastructure on behalf of Northern Irish energy consumers. Our gas assets include the Scotland to Northern Ireland Gas Pipeline, or SNP, which I'll talk about a bit more in the next slide, as well as sections of the onshore transmission network. We also provide TSO and gas market operator services in conjunction with GNI UK. Just move the slide on, please. So just to provide a bit of background, gas was first introduced to Northern Ireland on the East Coast for power generation back in the 1990s. And the rest of the network was then developed out from there. This means we've got modern network infrastructure, including PE distribution pipes, which is helpful in relation to hydrogen readiness. We're a small but still growing market with annual demand around 17 terawatt hours and approximately 320,000 customers. Vast majority of gas is imported via the SNP from Moffat in Scotland. So on average, around about 4 million standard cubic meters per day. And obviously that's a bit higher in the winter and less in summer. There's also a gas interconnector with the Republic of Ireland, which is owned and operated by GNI UK, which provides security of supply. Move the slide on, please. So just in relation to gas network decarbonisation, you may have noticed from the UK Hydrogen Vision report that the rate of growth of hydrogen demand in Northern Ireland is less than in the rest of the UK. Part of the reason for that is that we've got a very large agricultural sector, and therefore there's significant potential for biomethane production in Northern Ireland. Biomethane is therefore expected to play a much greater role in decarbonising Northern Ireland's gas supplies than in Great Britain. Nevertheless, hydrogen is going to be critical in relation to our ability to achieve our net zero targets. So the opportunity in Northern Ireland is very much for green hydrogen. We have significant wind potential, and this creates synergies with green hydrogen production. Our ambitious renewable electricity targets require us to install renewable capacity that is more than double our peak electricity demand. Historically, we've relied on exporting our surplus renewable electricity generation to Great Britain, but the GB electricity market is also decarbonising, and that export opportunity is reducing. Development of green hydrogen in Northern Ireland is therefore essential for us to continue to maximise our renewable energy potential. The east coast of Northern Ireland has the geology required to support large-scale salt cavern hydrogen storage. In conjunction with green hydrogen production, if developed, this could provide interseasonal storage solutions for renewable energy in Northern Ireland and also help us to reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuels. It would also improve the future security of supply of decarbonised energy across GB and Ireland. So hydrogen readiness is progressing in North Ireland, but just to be honest, it's at a slower pace than in GB at the moment. We're still waiting for a lot of our policy frameworks to be put in place. Mutual Energy is collaborating with National Grid and GNI UK, however, on the development of a roadmap for hydrogen at the Moffat interconnector point. We're also working with a number of partners on the pre-development of 2 potential projects. So that's Project Kern and Ballylunford Part X. Project Kern is a hydrogen blending project with Phoenix Natural Gas, who are another distribution network operator in North Ireland. And Ballylunford Part X is a large-scale green hydrogen production and storage project with B9 Energy and Isla McGee Energy Limited. One of the key differences at the moment between North Ireland and Great Britain is that we don't have any cluster projects. But as set out in the Hydrogen Vision report, development of a 25-kilometre hydrogen pipeline on the east coast between Larne and Carrickfergus could help facilitate emergence of a hydrogen valley. The pipeline would connect up green hydrogen production from offshore wind with salt cavern storage and up to 1 gigawatt of currently gas-fired power generation. It would also greatly enhance the blending options within the wider gas network. I suppose the key message I'd leave you with this morning is that it's absolutely essential that North Ireland keeps pace with hydrogen developments in Great Britain. And we're therefore very keen to continue collaborating with the ENA as well as other GB market operators. So I hope that gives you a bit of a sense for what's going on in North Ireland. If you've got any questions, I've provided contact details, and please get in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. And I think, I know I said this to you at the start, but I'll reiterate, thank you very much for you and your team's involvement in this report. I think it's really added to what we're able to give out to our stakeholders, really, to have that Northern Ireland angle there. You articulated that very well with the renewable energy and green hydrogen challenge and that interface between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, and that as renewable capacity continues to grow, there might not be such a need for export of renewable electricity from Northern Ireland to GB. So there's a question then about green hydrogen and how the two link up. So thanks very much for the presentation. I'm going to invite David back to the screen and then pass over to Katie again, who's going to chair our Q&A session on Hydrogen Vision and any other questions we can pick up in the time available as well.
Thanks very much, James, and thanks, David and Mark. So, David, one of the questions we've had asked is about imports. And the question is, do we consider imports both by shipment of ammonia and hydrogen connections from Europe? I don't know if you want to just say a few words on imports and how we've considered that as part of the project.
That's a really good question. So yes, we have, and in the report you'll see that there's mention towards the back end of the period that there's the potential for import and export, and indeed National Gas have been involved in this, and the maps reflect their project union plans, which are also, they feed in the European hydrogen backbone plans as well. So yeah, the vision does envision the potential for import and export.
Thanks very much, David. I can see one other question that I think relates to the vision. So James, if I come to you, we've had a question from David Simmons. Other than for industrial clusters, hydrogen will be primarily for heating. Are you challenging the availability of electricity for the heat pump alternative? I think there's probably a chance to say a few words on what we're doing under ENA's whole systems piece.
Yeah, sure. So to come back on the sort of first part of that, which I know wasn't a question, but the intention with hydrogen is that you would start in the industrial clusters for lots of very good reasons, and almost hydrogen would be prioritized for use in industry, and then it would build out from there. So I wouldn't say it would necessarily primarily be used in heating. It will be used a lot in industry. It has a really important role in power generation and helping to support the electricity generation when we've got really high renewables, but when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And that's pretty uncontroversial. Major commentators, Committee on Climate Change and others, are really supportive of this. There's plenty of transport use cases, particularly in heavier transport, heavy goods vehicles, maybe some rural trains, as David has mentioned, and potentially in aviation and shipping as well. But you're right in the sense that the report does show quite a big role for hydrogen in heating. In terms of, are we challenging the sort of availability of electricity for heat pumps? I'm not sure challenging would necessarily be the right word, but we as ENA, we represent both the gas networks and the electricity networks. And what we're trying to do is help plot a pathway through really to how networks can support the transition to net zero across both of those vectors. There are no easy answers to any of this, and we as ENA are convinced that the eventual answer will rely in a whole energy system that relies on both electricity and gas working together to come to the most efficient answer for consumers. And 100% electrified system looks challenging. Definitely 100% gas system or gaseous system is not a route that we're going to be going down. The answer will be somewhere in the middle, and so it's something that we're looking at a lot more through the work we're doing in ENA on whole systems, and more to come on that.
Brilliant, thanks, James. We've got a bit of a different question here. So, David, I'll put this to you. It's more about public participation and whether there was any opposition to the Kiel hydrogen project, and what are we doing to promote this in schools. So I wonder if it might be a chance to talk a bit about the Hello Hydrogen project and what that's doing. And
yeah, that's an interesting angle, actually. Yeah, thank you for the prompt on that. Just a quick word on Kiel. So for those who don't know, that was a blending project where we blended natural gas in with hydrogen, on the university campus at Kiel. There was no opposition at all, actually, and I was lucky enough to meet some of the people that were involved in the trial, and they loved it. Right, they were just like, I was playing my part in decarbonisation, didn't notice a thing. It was kind of what you want, really. So there was good public support from the Kiel trial, and I think then the question is more that, so what are we doing to get that sort of message out there about the role of blending, for example, around schools and public, and on schools, there's work underway to then take that message out, particularly at local schools around the area, but we're thinking about what we can do more generally, and then just wider. A number of gas networks are involved in the Hello Hydrogen campaign, which is seeking to just engage the public on the potential future role that hydrogen might have. There's a lot of misunderstandings around the role of hydrogen, about what that might mean. People probably have heard of the word hydrogen, but might not be aware that it's a potential tool that they could use in future to decarbonise what they do. And so it's slightly awareness, slightly education. It does start, it's quite basic, like it's, what is hydrogen, the role it might play, but that's where we are with the public discussion. And so things like Kiel give us the platform to have that discussion, and we're doing that through things like Hello Hydrogen.
James, did you want to chip in there?
Yeah, I've seen that whoever posted that original comment has followed up saying about kickback on Kiel. I do wonder if that comment is intended to be focused on the Kiel trial or the village trials. So the Kiel trial was around blending hydrogen. It was at Kiel University, so a very kind of specific environment. There are also village trial proposals being put forward in Whitby in Cadence area and in Redcar in Northern Gas Networks area. I could respond to this, but David, I wonder if you want to just give the Whitby angle on that.
Yeah, one of the challenges, right, is we've got so many different projects and trials going on around hydrogen. It's I don't blame the questioner for perhaps referring to Whitby as Kiel, but yeah. So ourselves, Cadent, of proposing to run. So the government. So backing up, the government have said that they want to run a hydrogen village trial. That's in the hydrogen strategy, and ourselves at Cadent have put forward a proposal to run that in a village called Whitby up in Ellesmere Port, and our counterparts at Northern Gas Networks and Wales in the West are looking at a similar project, but up in Redcar in the northeast. And there's been quite a lot of talk in the media around different public views on this, and in particular there is some opposition to at least the one in Whitby. I'm not close to the one in Redcar, so I can't really talk to that, but the one in Whitby, there is some opposition in the local area. But what we've been doing the last year has been a consultation process with a view to putting forward our proposal. It's literally just gone into government, actually, what the proposal is. And you know, it's the opposition that we've seen has actually helped us put in what I think is a better bid. We've taken people's concerns around the role of hydrogen, the role of electrification, because it wasn't just a hydrogen trial. This was we're going to turn the methane off and you can either have hydrogen or a heat pump. Their concerns around what that sort of trial might have for them, and we've reflected that in the proposal, to be honest. The other thing I would say is that, and this doesn't always get the slots on things like GB News or Sky News, I've been up in Whitby and I've been speaking to the residents, and there's a real mix, right? There definitely is some people that don't want us to be turning the methane off and don't want hydrogen, they're not interested in a heat pump, but there are also some people out there that think it's great that this sort of thing's being happened to Whitby. There's a real spread of opinion there in the group. Where it's going to go, I don't know. It's now with government to decide whether they want the trial to go ahead in Whitby or they want to go with the one up in Redcar. But we're continuing to engage with the community in Whitby. It's important for us that this is something that, if it were to go ahead, it's done in partnership with them, and that means continuing to speak to people that have concerns so that we can work with them on addressing those concerns.
Thanks very much, David. We've got a few more questions on blending, but I'm conscious we've got a couple on the biomethane project that you talked about, James, on the role of hydrogen and biomethane. So if we just answer those. So one is from Jonathan Skurlock at the NFU, and he's asking, biomethane-based methane has ultimately limited technical potential, but what about the potential of bio-SNG and e-methane as additional replacement gases, and will this project cover that really?
Yeah, so team me up nicely, Katie. That wasn't part of the question, that last bit, but team me up nicely and say my answer to that is that the project will cover all of these things. So I maybe was a little bit simplistic in just referring to biomethane, but really what the project is trying to do is say, well, there's a lot of focus on hydrogen. We put out the hydrogen vision, but there are other fuels, other gaseous fuels that can contribute to net zero, and we need to make sure that our network can make the most out of all of these different fuels. So the project won't just be looking at biomethane, it will be looking at other green gases as well.
Brilliant. And then David Simmons has sort of commented a similar sort of question. Shouldn't all biomethane be used to make liquid fuels for aviation and shipping, which can't be made from hydrogen? But I feel like you've probably just covered that, James. Anything further you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that strays a little bit more into use cases rather than necessarily how the pipeline networks would accommodate them. So it will be part of what's looked at on the project, maybe not the core focus of it. I think there are a lot of questions unanswered on this. Aviation particularly, it's really, there needs to be some sort of solution for long distance aviation, which probably involves hydrogen in some way. But the path through to that is less clear than it is for other use cases. So yeah, it's something that we'll touch on the project, but there's definitely more work needs to be done on that across the industry.
Brilliant. And then there's a question here relating to the project when you spoke about the impact on gas demand. And Sabine Munch has said, thank you for a clear walkthrough, James. Do you have a comment on the growth of hydrogen for mobility and its impact on gas demand for the transmission network?
Okay, I'll take that to mean hydrogen demand.
I assume it means hydrogen demand, yeah.
It may not be, but if I can just assume that it means hydrogen demand for the transmission network, I think that links in with my last comment, particularly around aviation, also on shipping, in that there are major uncertainties on the role of hydrogen in some pretty potentially major use cases. I mean, aviation is one. If we have a lot of hydrogen for aviation, that is a lot of hydrogen. Therefore, we're going to need a big chunky transmission network to manage all of that. If it has a lower role in aviation than that, then there's less hydrogen going through that transmission network. I think what's important for me is to sort of break it down into chunks. And the first chunk from a transmission perspective is saying, well, do we need a transmission backbone at all? National Gas have proposed their project Union to be that national transmission backbone. Ofgem came out yesterday saying that they've approved support to get that backbone off the ground. And that's really predicated on what we know now, in that we know that we're going to need some form of transmission backbone for industrial use of hydrogen. We know we're going to need it as well for power generation. As I said earlier, that's a pretty uncontroversial statement. That's something we know we're going to need. we'll get that in, get that built, and then over time, some of these use cases for things like mobility and things that are less clear will hopefully become clearer over time.
And Sabine has just commented saying yes, hydrogen. That is what she was referring to. We've had a
Very
comment
good.
from Peter Wassers talking about how we've had hydrogen buses in Belfast since December 2020 and bus drivers love it. And I'm conscious that in our report, we did actually talk about the Right Bus project and how there are buses in Northern Ireland using hydrogen. David, I'm conscious in the report, we also talked a bit about other uses. So we mentioned Andrex and how they were replacing natural gas with hydrogen to power their toilet paper factory. I didn't know if there's anything you'd like to say there on the other uses of hydrogen. We've mentioned heat, we've mentioned transport just there. And I know you're involved in the Hydrogen Capital project as well.
Yeah, so I mean, like, just as James said, right, there's a lot of uses for hydrogen, which just that was almost universal agreement on. Like, it's definitely going to be used to decarbonise large swathes of heavy industry, protecting jobs and skills right here in the UK. It's got a huge potential in helping balance the electricity sector, both as a form of a power storage, but also as providing peaking plant as well. And obviously, we think that it's got quite a strong role to play in decarbonising heat as well in homes and businesses right across the country. Also transport. So whether it's the jury's out a bit on transport, but we think certainly in heavy transport, it's got a potential role there to play, and we see that with the investments being made by people like Right Buses, some of the investments being made in Northern Ireland, for example, where the range benefits and the reduced refueling issues that hydrogen gives compared to electricity, for example, can give benefits. What that looks like in 2050, I don't know, but the report does talk about that. It does talk about, remember, this is a report that talks about the potential of hydrogen, essentially. It gives that vision, and so we do touch on that. And then just bringing it back full circle, there's some great use cases and case studies in there. You mentioned Andrex as one where they're making toilet paper today using hydrogen. There are others right across the country where hydrogen is being used today to decarbonise industry. One of the favourite ones that isn't in the report that I always like to talk about is Pilkington's, which is up in the northwest. And the amount of energy that is required in order to make glass is phenomenal. And they've already converted one of their furnaces to run on clean, low carbon hydrogen, so they can make, quotes, green glass. And without that, these are jobs that could well be lost in the UK. It's industry that could close, impacting communities and also the UK economy. And hydrogen today is already being used to decarbonise these sectors, and that's only going to accelerate in the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. I'm conscious we've got a couple of questions on blending that we haven't answered, so James, I might come to you on those. We've had an anonymous question. Someone said National Gas Transmission says that blending up to 20% will not require any changes to the network at all. Does this suggest that up to 20% is now baked into the system?
Yeah, so I think that I should have mentioned at the start already when we talk about blending that the blending decision in 2023 is a decision on distribution level blending. It's not a decision on transmission level blending. That's because of the composition of the pipes really that make up the different pressure tiers. So everything we've said really so far is focused on distribution. On transmission, there is work going on to test putting blended hydrogen into the steel pipes that make up the NTS, and that is ongoing. So I don't think we can say that everything is absolutely completely over the line and ready to go on the NTS, but certainly that testing is underway, and we don't have anything yet that's come back from that that suggests that hydrogen shouldn't be blended into the national transmission system. And definitely it's really, really important that we look at this, because if we're just doing it at the lower pressure tiers and gas distribution level, it will be a useful tool. But it's when we get it into the NTS at national level that we can start getting serious amounts of hydrogen in there at scale over the coming years.
Thanks, James. And I can see Vicky, you helpfully put your camera on. Was there anything you'd like to add there?
No, I was just going to say what James had said, so perfect.
Brilliant. Well, Vicky, I might come to you on this next question since you are still with us. Lloyd Garvey has asked, how will gas grids handle injection at different places in the same pipe stream? If a project downstream injects 20%, does that prevent all upstream locations? And I know that's something we've been talking about as part of the capacity allocation project that, James, you mentioned. We're doing a piece on capacity and connections. Is there anything you'd like to say on that, Vicky?
I would say probably watch this space, because we haven't got any there's lots of discussion on that at the moment. There isn't necessarily a view as to how it's going to work. It will very much depend on how it's connected, where it's blended, whether it's blended in an above ground installation, who owns the blending equipment. There's so many things that would have to be determined to then work that through. But the intention is that you shouldn't be constraining people from connecting to the network.
Brilliant, thank you. And James, I don't know if you want to take this question. And we've had a question from Peter Foreman, who says, apologies, is rather new to the party, but do we have any sense of what blending will do for the import of gas across our interconnectors? So I suppose that interconnects to Europe and to Northern Ireland and then to the Republic of Ireland as well, I guess.
New to the party, but asking a really good question. There are different proposals. I can't remember the exact numbers across my head, but there are different proposals across Europe and across the whole world, really, in the amount of hydrogen blend that will be allowed into pipeline networks. You're right, that creates a potential problem across interconnectors, not just between GB and the continent, but all around the world, really. It's something to be looked at. There are options. There are obviously looking at technical options around whether that blend could be managed anyway with a slightly different blend across the interconnector. There's deblending as well, to take hydrogen out of a blended network, blend and then deblend it out and use it before it goes anywhere else. So it's a live issue. I think it's probably the right answer on that one. There are different options that are being looked at, but you're right to flag it.
Brilliant, thank you, James. And then we've had a question from David Simmons. Is anyone looking at a simple purifier to take mains hydrogen up to HFC quality so consumers could run hydrogen cars charged at home once we get a hydrogen grid? Now, I think this is very visionary, isn't it, at the moment? It's certainly been talked about. I don't know if there are any projects underway currently. I'm not aware of anything. James, David, Vicky, I don't know if any of you are aware of.
It's not something I'm aware of. If anyone
it's
else
not something the networks would be involved in, to be honest. I mean, we speak to technology manufacturers. I've not heard of anybody looking at that, I'm afraid. I have to say, I think most of if you look at where the investments go in, the vast majority of investment at the smaller vehicle end is going in electrification.
Hydrogen UK is probably a good place to have a look at that, because they kind of have a real view of what's happening in the hydrogen world as opposed to the network world.
And I can see that Brett's just commented, thank you very much, Brett, Head of Policy and Analysis at Hydrogen UK, the Hydrogen for Transport project. Consider this for HGVs. Thanks very much, Brett. So I think that's pretty much all of the questions answered. If not, please do repost and we'll make sure we cover it. I'm conscious that David and James in particular, when we're talking about the vision and in terms of next steps and what we need to deliver, we had some really clear asks in there in terms of what we want the role of FSO to be and for Ofgem and things. David, I wonder if you just want to pick up on a few of those sort of key asks that we had and just delve into them a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would encourage people to have a look at the back of it. We've sort of set out what the gas networks will do and what we're committing to do, and there are some commitments that the gas networks have come together to make in how we're going to further the hydrogen economy. But there are also some asks of government as well, particularly now as we're moving toward completing the energy bill. People are thinking about the manifestos, etc. And there are several in there. Just to pick out the one that you mentioned there, Katie, in particular, around the role of the future system operator. Hydrogen, the nature of hydrogen, right? It means that it will be used, to decarbonize a number of different sectors, but it complements other fuels, particularly things like electricity. I've already spoken about the role that it has in decarbonising the electricity sector. I work for a gas network. I think in heat even we'll see a mixed solution where heat pumps and hydrogen boilers will be deployed, potentially even in the same street, depending on what's most appropriate for that customer and that premises. And we think about the interplay between these different technologies. It's vital that we don't design a gas network and a power network in isolation. We'll just end up gold plating both of them. The most economic solution for the UK and for consumers that are going to have to ultimately pay the bill for the conversion will be to come up with a whole systems model that takes both these fuels and some of the other ones that will be used in decarbonisation to come up with an optimised model for how we can do this the fastest and at least cost for consumers. And so we've cut out a number of proposals. Giving the FSO responsibility for that whole systems view is very much front and centre of those.
Brilliant. Was there anything from you, James, that you'd wanted to pick up on that point?
No, I mean, yeah, as David has said, I encourage people to look at the report. We've got 10 points that we make at the back of the report around what we need really from government and regulators and others to move this forward. We've also got some commitments made by the gas networks, as well as what we will do to play our part in making this vision happen. Probably the one actually to pull out from the 10 asks is the first one, in that we're asking for sort of renewed political commitment to be put behind what we really see as the next stage of hydrogen. So there's been a good amount of political commitment put in to develop hydrogen production, to lay out the strategy behind that, to put together the business models for that. Once we get the energy bill through to actually legislate for that, we'll get projects off the ground, and that's fantastic. The projects that were announced recently amount to 20 green hydrogen projects, totaling 250 megawatts of green hydrogen, and then a few blue hydrogen projects in the clusters as well. It's a good start, but it's just literally just a start. It's not going to make a massive dent in our carbon emissions. It's not going to send us really, really far on the way to the potential that hydrogen could have. So that's why we put that in there, really, because the way to do that, to build that scale, is through pipeline networks. It's through connecting this production with demand. It's through enabling the real scale up of these projects to go beyond small amounts of megawatts into real mega projects. That's the way to unlock lower cost of capital and really, really get the cost of hydrogen down, which is the thing which will really enable us to realise the benefits. So I would encourage those on the call who've been quite enthused by today, hopefully, to take that message and to put it into to government and others to really say, this is what we need to do now to drive this agenda forward.
Great. Thanks very much, James. And Vicky's just sent me some written responses to some of the questions, so I'll post those in the chat in a moment. But I think we've come to the end of our Q&A session now, and conscious that Mark, if there are any questions for Mark, we'll share Mark's email as well if you've got any questions on the specific Northern Ireland perspective of the vision report and just any general Northern Ireland questions. So thanks, Vicky, David, and I'll pass back to you, James.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, that's just us wrapping up there, really. Thank you to everyone today, to David, to Vicky, and to Mark for presenting and sharing their insights, and also to Katie for chairing the Q&A sessions excellently as well. The recording will be uploaded to YouTube, as we flagged earlier. I think that's going to happen later today, but watch this space. The next Insights Forum will be in touch about, likely to be October, but it may shift a little bit. As I noted earlier, that's really where we want to start testing what we're going to be doing next year in 2024, but we'll also be updating on some of the projects that we've talked through today. And if you'd like to get in touch with us directly, any further questions on what we've discussed today or any other bits of feedback on particularly some of the deliverables that we've got in the programme, which are less well developed and we're still thinking about, then please get in touch. You can drop us an email at gasgoesgreen@energynetworks.org. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and speak to you all soon.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.